They called him the family's biggest disappointment. They had no idea who he really was. His own wife stood beside her sister Talling and looked at him like he was nothing. In front of everyone, they humiliated him hard and filmed every second of it. But what they didn't know was about to change everything forever. He is the rightful heir. The man they called poor was the billionaire heir the entire company had been waiting for.
If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you the most, stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens to Ethan Callaway will make you want to stand up and cheer. And if this story moves you even a little, hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell these stories every single week. Stories about quiet people who turn out to be the strongest ones in the room. Ethan Callaway was 34 years old, and to everyone at the Callaway-Whitmore family gatherings, he was the husband who never quite measured up. He drove a 7-year-old sedan with a cracked side mirror. He wore the same 3 sweaters on rotation. He worked, as far as anyone in his wife's family knew, as a consultant for some small firm downtown, a vague job title that nobody bothered to ask more about because nobody thought it was worth asking about. His wife, Sarah, had married him 8 years ago against her family's wishes, back when she still believed that love mattered more than a bank balance. But over the years, as her sister Vanessa's husband bought a lake house and her cousin's fiancé got written up in a business magazine, the whispers had grown louder. Sarah had married beneath her, they said. Sarah had wasted her potential on a man who would never be anything. What none of them knew, not Sarah, not Vanessa, not a single soul at that family table, was that Ethan Callaway's mother's maiden name was Callaway for a reason. His grandfather, Richard Callaway, was the reclusive founder and chairman of Callaway Holdings, a diversified empire spanning logistics, real estate, and renewable energy, worth just north of $11 billion. Ethan had spent the last 12 years working his way up inside the company under a different surname on his employee badge, refusing every privilege his grandfather offered, insisting on earning every promotion the hard way. He wanted, more than anything, to be loved for who he was, not for what he might one day inherit. So he told no one, not even his wife. It wasn't secrecy for the sake of secrecy. It was a test of the world, and slowly, painfully, the world kept failing it. The night everything changed began like any other family occasion. Vanessa's 40th birthday party, held in the ballroom of the Whitmore family's favorite hotel. Sarah had asked Ethan to come, mostly out of obligation, and reminded him twice not to embarrass her by saying something awkward to her father's business associates. Ethan agreed, as he always did, folding himself smaller to fit into rooms that had never made space for him. He sat near the edge of the head table that night, watching his wife laugh with people who had never once asked him a genuine question about his life. Vanessa held court in an emerald gown, drink in hand, entertaining a small crowd with a story about a family vacation Ethan hadn't been invited to. When she noticed him sitting quietly, she raised her glass in his direction with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To Ethan," she said, loud enough for the table to hear, "for proving that love really is blind." A ripple of laughter went through the group. Sarah, standing beside her sister, didn't correct her. She just smiled, tight and awkward, and looked away. Ethan said nothing. He had learned over the years that saying nothing was often the only dignity available to him in that family. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Fueled by champagne and a lifetime of feeling entitled to say whatever she pleased, she turned to Ethan with a theatrical flourish. "You know what?" she said. "I think we should toast properly. To the man who still hasn't figured out how to buy his wife a house." She lifted her wine glass and tipped it directly onto Ethan's chest. The ballroom went silent. Red wine spread across his gray sweater like a wound. Somewhere near the back, a phone was already recording. Sarah gasped, but it took her 3 full seconds, 3 seconds that would haunt her for months afterward, before she said anything at all. And even then, all she managed was an embarrassed, "Vanessa!" "That's enough." rather than anything that defended her husband. Ethan stood slowly, wine dripping from his sleeve, and looked around the room. He saw uncles who had never once asked about his work. He saw cousins recording his humiliation for a laugh they'd share online later. He saw his wife, frozen, more concerned with the scene than with him. And in that moment, something inside him settled, quiet and final, like a door closing gently rather than slamming shut. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He simply said, "Thank you for the wine, Vanessa. I hope it was a good vintage. I'll be sure to make a note of it," and walked out of the ballroom with his head high, leaving behind a stunned silence and a room full of people who had just humiliated a man they knew nothing about. What the family didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, Ethan's grandfather Richard had suffered a mild stroke, one that left him shaken enough to finally accelerate the succession plan he had been quietly building for over a decade. The board of Callaway Holdings had unanimously approved Ethan as the next chairman, contingent only on a public announcement at the company's annual gala, an event that, as fate would have it, Sarah's father's real estate firm had a long-standing contract with, meaning the entire Whitmore family had already been invited as guests, completely unaware that the keynote speaker was the very man they had just doused in wine. Ethan drove home that night in silence, his sweater still damp, and sat for a long time in his car in the driveway before going inside. He thought about walking away entirely, from the marriage, from the family, from all of it. But somewhere in that quiet, he realized that revenge born from hurt would only prove them right about who they thought he was. He decided instead that the gala, just 10 days away, would not be an act of vengeance. It would be an act of truth. Sarah came home an hour later, apologetic in the hollow way people are when they're more worried about consequences than about the person they've hurt. "I should have said something," she told him. "I don't know why I didn't." Ethan listened, and for the first time in years, he let himself really look at his wife. Not with anger, but with a kind of sad clarity. He didn't tell her the truth that night. He wanted her to arrive at the gala and see it unfold with her own eyes, the same way the rest of the family would. The 10 days that followed were the strangest of Ethan's life. By day, he sat in strategy meetings with the board, reviewing the future of a company worth more than most countries' GDP. By night, he came home to a wife who still had no idea her husband held that much power, quietly picking up group texts from Vanessa, mocking the wine incident, as if it were the funniest thing that had happened all year. He kept his composure. He kept his silence. He was no longer performing smallness out of insecurity. He was choosing patience, the way a man chooses to let the truth reveal itself in its own time rather than force it. The night of the gala arrived, and the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel glittered with the entire elite of the city's business world. Sarah wore a stunning navy gown, insisting Ethan wear his one good suit so he wouldn't look out of place, a comment that, only 10 days earlier, might have stung. Now it simply amused him. Vanessa arrived on the arm of her husband, already scanning the room for people worth being seen with, utterly unaware that the man from the wine incident was seated at the reserved family table near the front. A seating arrangement she assumed was simply the Whitmore family's usual proximity to power. Not realizing the power belonged to the person she had humiliated, the lights dimmed. The company's chief communications officer stepped to the podium and began the evening's most anticipated announcement, the unveiling of Callaway Holdings' next chairman, following the semi-retirement of founder Richard Callaway. A hush fell over the crowd. On the enormous screen behind the stage, the Callaway Holdings crest glowed gold against black, and beneath it appeared a name that made Sarah's blood run cold. Ethan Callaway. For a moment, she thought it was a coincidence. Surely there was another Ethan Callaway in the world. But then the spotlight swept across the room and landed exactly where her husband was sitting. And Ethan rose from his seat, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the stage with the calm, practiced ease of a man who had spent years quietly preparing for exactly this moment. Vanessa's champagne glass slipped slightly in her hand. Sarah's father, who had spent years dismissing his son-in-law as a nobody, went pale as he realized who had been sitting 3 tables down all along. Ethan stepped up to the podium. He didn't look for revenge in the crowd's stunned faces, though he could have savored it. Instead, he spoke about his grandfather, about the years he'd spent learning the business from the ground floor without using his name to skip a single step, about believing that people should be judged by their character rather than their bank accounts. A belief, he admitted quietly, that had been tested more than once, even within his own family. He didn't name Vanessa. He didn't need to. Every person who had been at that birthday party understood exactly what he meant, and the weight of their own behavior settled over the room like a held breath. After the applause faded and the formal proceedings ended, Sarah found him near the edge of the stage, her hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking somewhere between shame and disbelief. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Because I wanted to know if you'd have stood up for me even if I had nothing," he said gently. "And now I know the answer." It wasn't cruelty in his voice. It was simply the truth, spoken plainly. The way truths often sound once all the performance has been stripped away. In the weeks that followed, Ethan didn't seek revenge on Vanessa or humiliate her the way she had humiliated him. He didn't need to. The story had already spread through the family and the industry, carried by the same phones that had once recorded his shame, now replaying his quiet dignity instead. He funded a foundation in his grandfather's name focused on mentorship for young people entering business without family connections, a project close to his heart. Born directly from the years he had spent being underestimated, he and Sarah began the long, uncertain work of rebuilding trust. Not because the marriage was guaranteed to survive, but because Ethan believed people deserved the chance to become better than their worst moment, so long as they were willing to actually change. As for Vanessa, she sent a private apology months later, one Ethan accepted without fanfare, understanding that grace, freely given, cost him nothing and asked nothing of her humiliation in return. He had learned, in the space between that wine-stained sweater and that spotlighted stage, that real power was never about making people pay for their cruelty. It was about becoming someone who no longer needed their approval to know his own worth. And if there's one thing Ethan Callaway's story teaches us, it's this: the people who overlook you today may one day stand in the room where your true value is finally revealed. And how you carry yourself in that moment will matter far more than anything they ever said about you. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who later had to eat their words? We read every single one.